Hello, sisters. Welcome to the Sacred Medicine Podcast, weaving powerful, soulful practices into functional medicine. Step into this beautiful space of devotion and explore everything from nurturing foods, rituals, sexuality, and awakening your innate sensuality. It is time to own your radiance. This is the Sacred Medicine Podcast. Hello, and we are back for another week of the Sacred Medicine Podcast. I am your host, Margaret Romero, and this week we have Sheila Kamara Hay. She is an ecstatic birth visionary advocate and coach. She desires to share with women that childbirth is not something they must endure, but a journey they can thoroughly enjoy. As a mother of three, Sheila has experienced firsthand a range of births, from the traumatic to the ecstatic, and has advised and inspired countless women in the creation or reclamation of their own births. So I brought Sheila on the show, one, because she is also one of the sister goddesses of the School of the Womanly Arts, which I am also a part of. And I have heard her name through the past several years. I knew this was like her jam. And I wanted to learn a little bit more about how women can experience childbirth more in ecstasy and possibly orgasmic rather than in fear and seeing it as a traumatic experience. So we talked about her journey, what that really looked like. It was in particularly her third pregnancy and childbirth. So we talked all about that, and also how she managed 6 hours of labor through pleasure. And so it was really, really fascinating. I've never heard a woman talk about their childbirth experience in this way. So it was really super fun and so enlightening that women can actually see this as a completely positive and not an experience based on fear. So just to highlight her experience. It was really, really beautiful. So you really need to tune in to listen to that. But for all those women out there who maybe don't plan on having children or really are not interested in having children in this lifetime, such as myself, I also wanted to talk to Sheila about ways that she helps women birth ideas or projects or books. And so as for myself, a book is definitely happening, and when is unclear at this moment. When it'll be finished is unclear. When it's actually going to start to happen, it's already started. So I wanted to also appeal to the women who are like, childbirth's not my deal. It's not something I want to experience. But Sheila also helps She helps women finding out the way you can experience an ecstatic birth would be very similar to experiencing an ecstatic birthing of an experience or desire that a woman may have, whether that is building a career, having a business, launching a project, or even writing a book. So we talk all about that and how we can do that in a beautiful feminine way, and how we need to have pleasure in all of it. And that's really the basis of the School of the Womanly Arts. And yeah, it was really just an empowering conversation. So without further ado, on to the show. And this week, I have Sheila Kamara Hay. She is an ecstatic birth advocate and trainer. Welcome to the show, Sheila.
Thank you so much, Margaret. I'm so happy to be here.
So tell us, share what it is that you're so passionate about today and what you do to help women. And I also want to know your personal experiences with that as well, because that is so fascinating for me.
Thank you. So I'm really passionate. I want women to know that childbirth can be one of the most empowering, one of the most transformative, and one of the most potentially pleasurable experiences in her life. And this is a statement that If I were to say, to an average woman, she would look at me like I've got 3 heads. What do you mean pleasurable? What are you talking about? Because our culture, like whenever I'm doing any talks or anything like that, I'll say to women, what's the first word that comes to mind when you think of childbirth? And I would say 90% pain. That's the word, pain. And so part of what I'm doing is trying to transform that perception. There's a reason that we give birth in pain, but it doesn't have to be that way. And my own personal experiences are really what led me to doing this work, because I've experienced both ends of it. My first birth experience was really traumatic, so traumatic that in fact I could not get pregnant again until I was able to unravel that and heal what had happened there. And the experiences that I had after that, and I'll definitely go into more detail if you want me to, were, my second birth was a reclamation of my relationship with my own body. And then my third birth kind of blew me away to the extent that it still gets me very emotional. Why didn't I know that childbirth could be that good? And why doesn't every woman know? The experience that I had with my third child, I was dancing through my labor. I was higher than I've ever been in my life. And
wow.
And at the time, I was a student at Mama Gina School of Womanly Arts, which is a school for pleasure in New York City. So I was very consciously actually preparing for pleasure in that birth, because I had learned in all of my training for my, second birth, and I had taken these natural childbirth classes. I had read everything I could read on the topic to educate myself. And I would always read like one line in a 300-page book that said something like, some women experience heightened states of bliss, ecstasy, and orgasm when they give birth. And I wanted to know what that was about. And so I was very consciously preparing for that birth with pleasure, but still what I experienced was beyond what I had even conceived was possible. And that was really the moment where I decided I needed to share with other women what was possible. You don't have all your options if you don't know your options, right? You don't have all the possibilities if you don't know what your possibilities are. So I started sharing about my births and sharing my resources and working with women one-on-one, training them to have these empowering and transformative and pleasurable birth experiences, and to use pleasure as a tool in labor. I think that pleasure is the most holistic birthing tool there is for labor and delivery. So I teach women how to integrate that. And I've also begun training practitioners to do that with their clients.
Wow. And so, all right. So tell us what you mean by, so you were dancing, but tell us did you not feel any pain? Was the pain not as bad? And did you actually have an orgasm during and throughout, or?
Okay.
I'd love to know.
So, childbirth is an intense experience. There's a lot of sensation, and your body is opening wider than it's ever opened before. Mm-hmm. So the thing with sensation is how you interpret it. So the pain that one experiences in birth is very different from, if you cut yourself or put your hand on an open flame. That kind of pain is a warning. It's a danger signal, right, to your body inherently. It's a trigger. The pain that you experience in childbirth is sensation, and you can interpret that whatever way your mind interprets that. So what we do culturally is we birth in a state of fear. Childbirth is something to be feared. We trade war stories with each other. We tell each other, how hard it was. That's our culture. And that's something that goes, way, way back to the beginning of time, with that story of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, where Eve took a bite of the apple and then God proclaimed that women will suffer when they give birth, right? So that's how deep the roots go, that childbirth is supposed to hurt. What happens when you're in fear? If you just imagine your body now, like think of something you fear, what happens to your body? You tense up, right? You contract, you grip yourself. So when you're in fear and you're in labor, you're actually blocking your energy flow. You're actually blocking your blood flow, and you're making it so much harder for your body to do what it needs to do, which is to open. So your body has to work harder, which kicks up the level of intensity, which kicks up the level of sensation, which for a lot of women will then kick up more fear. Oh my God, it's getting more intense, more fear, more constriction because you're fearful. And it's like a downward spiral from there. So childbirth has a lot of sensation. I definitely had that sensation in all three of my labors. The difference was, if I were to compare my first to my third, even my first to my second, is in honoring the body and the body's processes. I like to share with women that birth is actually a sexual act. We are, in our culture, everything baby related is kind of pure and clean, and we delegate it to one corner, and sexuality, not so much. It can be a little bit on the darker or shadier side and delegated to another corner. And we tend to keep those things very separate from each other. However, you birth with your sexual body. The same way you conceive your child with your sexual body, you birth with your sexual body. It's the same body parts. You're triggering a lot of the same hormones. And very similarly, if you think about when you have a sexual experience, the difference between that experience feeling really good or feeling really painful, the difference between the two tends to be like how you're honoring your body and your body's processes. So that's really the difference that I experienced. If I look at it like intellectually between my births, that's the difference between the births that I had. Was in the first, I didn't know how to honor my body and the body's processes. I didn't know how to surround myself with people that could support the vision that I was holding. Whereas the more I educated myself, the more I trained my body, the more I learned, I was able to do that. So in the second birth that I had, which was sort of like a very Zen-like reclamation, as I was pushing my baby out, I could feel my vaginal walls begin to expand and contract, which is the rhythm of orgasm. And I thought to myself, oh my God, it's true. Some women can experience this when they're giving birth. As soon as I had that thought, I went from being in my body to being in my head. But I knew viscerally in that moment that it was possible. So that was kind of the seed that made me think, for my third birth, I want to train for pleasure. And having been at Mama Gina's School of Womenly Arts, learning about different modalities of pleasure, learning about different modalities of sensual and orgasmic expansion, one of the things that really struck me was how similar the language of that and the tools of that were to the language of natural childbirth. So what do I mean by that? There's a lot of talk about like being present in your body, being present to the sensations, honoring your body. You use tools like breath, sound, movement in both cases. And when you're preparing for natural birth, as when you're learning how to expand the pleasure in your body. So these two things really came together in my mind, and I used these modalities to prepare for my third birth. Now, what was interesting about that birth is I didn't actually have a very sexual experience at all. What happened for that birth was my labor was really pokey. And to get it flowing, we did like the traditional walk around the block 3 times, try to move, exercise. What actually worked was putting on music and dancing. And I had this sensation like the contractions were a dance partner. And they would come and move my body and overtake me and then retreat and kind of like leave me pulsing on the floor and then come back again. And that was how my labor flowed. And it was almost like a spiritual experience because I was not resistant to the sensations. I was not resistant to the energy flow. I was able to allow it to overtake me and move with it, that I was able to have so much fun with it. So it's interesting because it wasn't, a lot of people are very intrigued by this idea of orgasmic birth. And orgasmic births definitely do exist. And I think the informal statistic is somewhere around like 20% of natural births have a tendency to be orgasmic. But there's a whole other realm of pleasure that's also available in childbirth that's not necessarily orgasmic in the way we understand orgasm.
Okay. Because I was going to say, well, there's so many different types of orgasms, and is it the sensation of let's say, a clitoral orgasm, or is it deeper than that, or is it not that sensation at all? And do you know?
Yeah, I think there's a very wide variety. I think that, there are women that will use clitoral stimulation to manage the flow of their labor and delivery, and can have a clitoral orgasm as they give birth. And before, anyone listening to this thinks to themselves, oh my God, how could you do that? Let me just share something, which is that as women, we have as much erectile tissue as men do. It's just all internal. So
Right.
the vaginal canal is full of erectile tissue. And if you think about when you have sex and you're not turned on, what that sensation is like versus when you have sex and you are turned on and
Right.
your tissues are engorged, what's that like? So it's very similar in birth. When you're engorged, you're able to open wide, you're able to stretch, and it's not so painful. Whereas if you're not turned on, if you're not engorged, that opening, that stretching can be accompanied by feelings of burning and pain.
Right. And so how long was your childbirth?
The experience of labor, or?
Yes, for your third one.
For the third one, I think it was around 6 or 7 hours.
Okay. And when did you start? Obviously, you had been sort of preparing for this. Did you start from the very beginning to do like all of the, like, take us, I know you said the dance part of it, but what were you doing like in the very like first 4 hours? Were you walking? Were you, was there music? Was there candles? Was there, like, paint the picture a little? And was it at home or was it in the hospital?
This was actually at a birthing center.
Oh, okay.
So it was an in between where we settled. There are two ways to integrate pleasure into birth. You can pull in pleasure from outside yourself, like literally give yourself pleasure. And then there's the experience of learning how to open up to the flow of pleasure that's always pulsing inside you. So I'm saying that just in preparing for that birth, I was doing both. But going into that third birth, I was very conscious of how I felt and what I was wearing, what I was seeing, what I was hearing. So I did have music with me. I had this little black maternity dress, which was totally comfortable, but at the same time, like, I loved being in. I felt like a woman in it. I could move in it. And I remember saying, like, I didn't want to wear those gowns with your butt hanging out of the back, because those make you feel so like unempowered and so victim-y and so gross. So I had the little black dress on, and I remember being in labor and I was in the taxi with my husband and pulling out lip gloss and putting it on. Now, these might seem like very silly things, but these were ways that I was taking care of myself to make sure I felt good. I felt sensual. I felt like a woman. I felt in my power. I had taken a hypnobirthing class before my second birth, and I brought, there was this image of a flower that we meditated on. So I had brought that and I put it up on the wall. So there were all of these little triggers that I had incorporated into what I was bringing with me to the birthing center, little things that I could source pleasure from outside of myself.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And then in addition to that, I had given my husband a cheat sheet, things he could say to me, because laughter is an incredible birthing tool as well. Because when you open your mouth, your throat, it's connected to opening up your vaginal walls, your cervix. So there's a saying, as above, so below in the birth world. So when your mouth and throat are open and relaxed, it's much easier to open and relax in the birth canal as well. So my husband had a sheet of paper with like some mantras that I wanted him to remind me of, things he could say or do that might make me laugh. And, I had become very somatically aware of my body, because I was also training in how to open my body to energy flow, open my body to that flow of pleasure within. So in this training, I'd become aware of when I was feeling scared or when I was feeling contracted in some way from circumstances. I'd become very aware of where I would grip in my body. So my right hip, my shoulders. So there were notes there about, hey, like remind me to open my hip or open my shoulders if you see I'm looking really tense. So there are lots of different things that I had going into the birth. And then the main thing in the moment in the birth was being able to really connect to my body, being able to really be present to my body, the sensations in my body, and following that towards pleasure. So to go really deep within, the dancing began, like I said, because my labor was pokey, but what was incredible about it was I wasn't dancing like any traditional dance form or any routine or anything that I practiced. The dance was actually the contractions guiding me towards pleasure. So every movement that I did was moving me towards feeling pleasure in my body. So in that way, it was so much fun. And again, it's not to say that there wasn't an intensity to it, but the overwhelming sensation was that this massive flow of energy, massive blood flow within my body, and always moving towards pleasure.
Wow. That sounds so amazing. And what kind of, I'm just trying to picture like the kind of music you had. Was it, was it a particular genre or?
I think it was a really eclectic mix of music that I had. You know, it was like different songs that I loved through the years from different genres. Again, it wasn't so much like the music was definitely pleasurable to me, but I think it was that sourcing from within,
right?
Which is a practice that I do with all my clients. Like, how do you source from within? How do you move towards what feels good? Even in something like making your decisions about where to birth, who to birth with, or, you know, if you're in the supermarket and there's, you know, 2 different types of chicken stock you want to buy, like, how do you make your decisions? So most of us in life make our decisions from a heady place. What makes sense, right? That's how we're trained. We're trained to be in our heads.
Right.
And we, to a certain extent, treat our bodies as like this vehicle to move our head from place to place. So that getting back into our bodies is something that I find most of us need reminders of and need training in. And childbirth is really a body trip, and that experience of being able to be in your body and follow the sensations of your body, always moving towards what feels good, is the power move.
So good. So good. And so for the women listening, if they're not, planning on having children, or they've never experienced childbirth before, I know that you also use this type of work to help women with that, to birth other things. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes. So what I found was that the journey towards reclaiming the process of birth, the physical process of birth, is one and the same as the journey of birthing anything in your life. And what I mean by that is, like, birth is a uniquely feminine process. And most of us, having been raised in a patriarchy where that story of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, no matter what kind of religious background you have, but that story is like the dominant creation story of our time. What that story tells you is that it's the story of the downfall of man, right? And that the reason for the downfall of man is the feminine. And so that's kind of like the undercurrent that is right now, it's like an earthquake. It's like trembling and being shaken apart as the feminine rises. But that's also what so many of us have been trained in. So just this, you know, like the linear, thinking about things in a linear fashion versus a circular fashion, which is a more feminine way of being. There are so many pieces that that we've all, having been raised in a patriarchy, have internalized as to what's okay and what's not. And so much of like reclaiming our own process as women is reclaiming the feminine within us. So just to take that out of like, you know, this metaphorical language and into reality. a lot of us will go through life judging our timing, right? Oh, there's a certain timeline that's set up before us about what we should be doing at what stage, various stages of our lives. And that's a very linear timeline. And the feminine timeline doesn't work like that. But we will judge ourselves against a linear timeline and then feel like we're behind, feel like we're not doing it right, feel like we're too slow, feeling like, there's a lot of that kind of internalization that happens to ourselves as women, where we cannot honor our flow, our unique process, because we're trying to fit into this masculine reality.
Right.
And
right.
so when someone has a desire, let's take an example, like maybe your desire is to write a book, right? There's a very linear masculine way to do that. You could hire a book coach, you could do a workshop, you could hire someone to kind of like really regulate what's due when and get it done at a certain time. There's nothing wrong with that. I mean, plenty of people are able to write books like that. It might not feel that good, but you get it done.
Right.
So the difference in what I try to support women in is to find their unique flow so that it feels good. Because we're talking about like birthing with pleasure now. We're not just talking about getting it done. So birthing with pleasure, if you're birthing a book, is going to be really connecting to your own intuition, really connecting to your own timeline, really honoring your body and your rhythm. And that book might take you longer to write, but you'll write it in your time in a way that feels good to you, as opposed to in this way that's very structured and linear and organized by somebody else's timeline. So a lot of it is, again, it's like reclaiming that relationship to your body, to your own inner wisdom, to your own sensuality and your own sensual nature, so that you can move through life in a way that feels good, not just in a way that makes sense.
Got it. So, because I was just going to say, I think a lot of us listening we've all thought about books that, we sort of all have maybe a book inside of us. And I would feel as if I did not have the structure of, okay, every morning I am going to, spend 30 minutes and write, Monday, Wednesday, Fridays, then to be honest with you, I don't know if I would actually do it, because then it would be like, oh, I just don't feel like it today. Or do you know what I mean? It almost would seem like there wouldn't be enough structure. I feel that there's sometimes too much. And then there's like, okay, you're going to do it in 30 days and that's it. And you're going to write it and you're going to like take 2 weeks of like full time of just doing, there's so much structure that you can apply to this. And I feel that if there was a woman listening and she's like, yeah, I would love to write a book, but if you told me that it would just be on my time schedule, it may never get done.
So what you're actually talking about, which is, I love that you're bringing this up, is the need for, in any birth, there's the union of the masculine and the feminine, right? So I'm talking about bringing the feminine forward, which is that like connecting to your own sense of what is right for you and your timeline. But you're absolutely right. Like that schedule is the masculine. And so it's the two in unison that is necessary to bring forth that child. Right.
Right.
What is happening in our society right now is the dominance of the masculine over the feminine. So let's say you did hire that, writing coach and you're on that schedule. You might spend a lot of time like beating yourself up over your own process, which is the feminine part of you.
Got it.
Does that make sense?
Yeah,
so it's
totally.
but you're absolutely right. They need to work together in unison. And again, if you just look at biology, the easiest way to think about that is you need the masculine and the feminine to create the child.
Exactly. And so I think that maybe, let's say you did hire a coach and they, for some reason, were like, look, we're going to do this in 30 days. Maybe you can say, you know what? I really would love a little bit more space around that. Just, maybe let's do it in 60 days or something like that. Like just to add, yes, there's structure, but it's a little bit loose. I mean,
Yes, well,
that would work for me.
again, it's the main thing is that it feels good to you. Like it might feel great to you, but to hire the coach and to get it done in 30 days, that might feel like absolutely right for you in your life, and it might not. So, but the main thing is like to come from that place of it feeling good to you. And then you can consciously use, just like in the physical act of labor, you can consciously use pleasure to manage your flow. So we talked a little bit about fear and how fear can get you into that contracted state in your body. And it's very similar whenever you're creating something like a metaphorical baby, whether it's a book or something else. You can get wrapped up in that fear, or you can use pleasure to consciously open your channels and allow flow to come through you. So anything creative, like that state of flow is where the ecstasy lies, right? And I know there have been tons of books written about it. And how do we access it? You can access it through dance. You can access it through movement. You can access it through meditation. You can access it through orgasm. There's so many different ways to access it, but you can also consciously use any of those instances of pleasure if you're in a moment of like a contracted state in your process to get you back into a state of flow. So the rhythm of labor is that like perpetual expansion and contraction, the physical act of like birthing a baby. There's that expansion and contraction. And a lot of times, contractions kind of have this bad rap. Like we want to numb them. We want to avoid them. We want to eradicate them. But contractions are kind of like the work your body has to do to open. And again, in the physical act of labor, when you reach for pleasure, you're supporting your body's opening. You're supporting that flow, the energy flow, the blood flow, so that your body can open. Similarly, in a metaphorical birth, when you hit a contractive moment, a lot of times that'll throw us into that state of like fear or state of like self-flagellation or whatever. But those contractive moments, like when I talk about a contractive moment, I mean like those moments where it looks like you're not going to get your desire, or there's a big obstacle to your desire.
Right.
And you feel like you're not sure how to move forward. So if you can think about those contractive moments as similar to the contractions that you have in labor, those contractive moments exist for your opening, for your expansion, for your growth. And if you can think back, most of us have had an experience in our life where it was difficult, but now looking back, we're so grateful for it, for the gifts it gave us.
Right.
So those are contractive moments. And when you're in the midst of those contractive moments, they can feel really painful and they can feel really hard. But the more you can use pleasure to consciously like manage your experience in those contracted moments, the more you can actually surrender to the flow of those contracted moments, the more you'll be able to get through them to that other side where you can get the gifts that are coming to you.
Yeah, I love that. One of the things that when I do write, if I'm writing a blog post or anything for that matter, any content at all, I must have music, and it needs to, it can't just be like in a speaker somewhere in the room. It needs to be like in my ears. It needs to be in my, and it has to be loud and it has to be like hip hop. And then I can write awesome. If I'm in a quiet room, I have to like force myself. Like it just doesn't happen. Music totally allows it to flow. So I totally get that, what you're saying.
Yeah. And I get that. I laughed because I totally understand the earbuds in your ear feeling. There's something about that that's just so cozy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's some, I don't know what it is, but it totally helps me. It's like the only way that I can write. I have to be prepared in that way. So.
When I first started teaching, I do a lot of my classes are online because ecstatic birth is something that's so like unique and so specific that I tend to work with people in lots of different places at the same time. So I do a lot of like virtual online trainings. And when I first started doing that, the idea of like talking into the screen, talking into like a camera, like terrified me. So I would very consciously, just like you're describing, I would very consciously bring things into my environment to source pleasure from and to kind of like inspire me, and that I could lean into when I was feeling nervous or scared. And I had like a ritual before teaching where I would dance and get like my energy flow going, my blood flow going. And then I would have, let's say a candle or an image or something inspirational that I could kind of look over at in those moments when I needed to source from pleasure.
And would you say that being a graduate of the School of Womenly Arts, which I am as well, that like ever since you've taken that course, would you say that you've just like upped the ante on your pleasure? What was your life before School of Womenly Arts?
Well, I came to the School of Womenly Arts in between my first and second, having my first and second child. And I came in probably like the biggest contraction I'd had in my life at that time, which was my son was about a year old, and I had decided that it was time to get pregnant again. It was a very mental thought. And I had a miscarriage, and then I had another miscarriage, and then I had a pregnancy that we had to terminate because we found out that it had a fatal birth defect. It wouldn't have lived outside the womb. And at this moment, I was like, what's wrong with me? And I went to all these doctors and I went to all these naturopaths and couldn't figure out what was wrong with me. And somehow the School of Womenly Arts had ended up like at the end of a very long list. And I was like, all right, let's go see what this Mama Gina is all about. And it did. I have to say, like, it completely transformed who I am, because in this instant, so what I realized was, I had grown up an only child for 9 years. My brother's 9 years younger than me. And I was taking all of that and saying to myself, okay, like I have one child and my child is one, and I had a very lonely childhood, and I was jealous of like these families that have lots of siblings, and I want that for my kids. So I should have another kid now. Right. And I had all these losses, and it wasn't until I came to the School of Womenly Arts and I was introduced to this idea that, I have a pussy and my pussy has a voice. And if I ask my pussy what is going on, well, she said to me, I'm not ready to have another baby. I'm still healing from the first. So that was my first introduction to my body having wisdom, to my body having a voice that was different from my mental, rational mind. And I was a very, very successful student. I went to Yale University. I got my master's at Columbia. So I was a very heady person. Yeah. And this was the first time that I got introduced to my body's wisdom. And then what the pleasure practices did for me is that they made me feel safe enough to feel for the first time. So all through my losses and all through everything, I was like, I'm fine. And when I look at pictures of myself at that time, I look like I'm not there. Like I look like I'm stone. I look like it's almost like I'm gripping. I'm trying to hold it together so hard to prove that I'm fine, that there's like no flow. And so the experience of starting to consciously reach for pleasure in my life allowed me to feel safe enough that I could actually feel, and I could grieve what I had been through, and I could rage over what I'd been through, and I could laugh and I could cry, and all of a sudden things started to flow. And anytime I had these big bursts of emotion, I could feel that energy flow pulsing in my body. Yeah. So that like big contractive moment of having this pregnancy that I had to terminate and feeling like something was wrong with me, it's one of the biggest gifts I ever got in my life, because it was that contraction that taught me what was on the other side.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, I think that the majority of women that go through the school have profound changes in their lives. And what year were you? When did you graduate?
So the first time I was at the School of Womenly Arts it's been about 12 years now. It's been about 12 years. And then I got pregnant when she did the very first mastery. And my second child was born in the midst of that. And then my third child was born. I did Inner Circle, which was then the upper level course. Yeah. So this is all 2006 to 2007.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I did Inner Circle too when she had that. So I only did one round of it, but yeah, it's been it was an amazing experience, and I'm still I'm not involved this year in it too much, but I do love going to events and things like that. So
yeah, I mean, I can say for me, the thing that's unique about the School of Womenly Arts, and really applies to birth as well, is one of the things the patriarchy has done to us as women is really isolate us. And we're not so much in community anymore. And to be in community at the School of Womenly Arts and places where these relationships between women are really valued have consistently allow me to see more for myself than I do on my own. And I know that I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing today if it wasn't for the School of Womenly Arts, not just because of the knowledge and the education that I got about the pleasure, but also because of the other women that could see me and project for me in ways that I would not have been able to see for myself.
totally.
And that, just to bring the metaphor home with labor, one of the most effective things a woman can do for labor and delivery is hire a doula. And a doula is basically somebody who is going to love you through your labor and who's not afraid and who's going to cheerlead you until you're doing great and have your back and support you and help you find pleasure when you can't find it yourself. And if you look at the statistics of doula care, they're crazy. They're like, reduction of interventions by, 30 to 50%.
Wow.
To the extent that, like when the researchers did the study, they said, if a doula were a drug, it would be unethical not to use it. Now, what's the doula doing? The doula is your sister, and she's holding for you the vision that you can't necessarily hold for yourself in the moment because you might be scared.
Right.
Or you might be, you're going somewhere that you've never been before. She's your guide. It's very interesting.
Yeah, I really love that. Did you have a doula through all your childbirths?
I did not the first time. The first time I went into my birth thinking, I'm strong enough, I can do this by myself. I did not know. I did not have a sense of like how to create support around me for what I wanted, not in terms of like hiring the right practitioner or anything like that. And then the second time that transformed completely. I hired a midwife who I knew could hold the vision for me. I hired a doula. And I remember that second birth, when I was going through transition. Transition is this moment at the end of like the first stage of labor, right before you start to push. Transition is this moment where nearly everybody has this thought of like, I can't go on anymore. I can't do this anymore, right? And the cool thing about transition is you're about to push your baby out. Like you're right there. But everyone kind of has that thought of like, I can't go on. I can't do this anymore. And I remember my doula at that moment kind of coming, looking me in the eyes. Sheila, look in my eyes, breathe with me. And I regulated to her. She literally carried me through her gazing and through the breath, through to my next few contractions until I was ready to push. I remember like it was this feeling of like I was putting down everything, all my anxiety, all my doubt, and just trusting her. Like it was a surrender, and she was able to carry me through that moment into the next phase of life. Now I could have gotten to that next phase no matter what, whether she was there or not. It would have been a lot harder, and it would have been a lot less pleasurable.
Wow, that sounds so beautiful. I wish that what about women who someone like me, who I don't plan on having children in this lifetime, but I plan on birthing other things and books and whatnot. God, wouldn't it be nice to just have, and I guess that's what you call a business coach, someone that helps you, or a life coach, or whatever it is, whatever kind of coach, helps you kind of guide you the same way that this doula did for you during your childbirth, the way she sort of carried you and she encouraged you and you leaned on her so much and you trusted her in such a deep level. To have that sounds, phenomenal, and it would be so beautiful to have that type of support that we should all have that type of support in our lives with our girlfriends, or if we decide to hire coaches or what have you. But I see that as something that's so needed. Don't you think?
Yeah, I think it's just something like, if you're going to go somewhere you've never been before, that's going to kick up anxiety. That's going to kick up fear. That's going to self-doubt. And so if you can have someone, it can be formal coach, like you said, or informal, but if you can have someone in your life that can kind of hold that vision for you, then it's just going to make you go through that.
Yeah, totally. Well, I love this conversation. It was really amazing. Also, from a former School of Womenly Arts graduate, we are sister goddesses. And, I just love meeting and getting to know other sister goddesses around the world. So it's just amazing. So thank you for being here today. Was there any last points that we did not touch upon that you wanted to share with the audience at all? Or do you feel like you're good?
Talk about this for hours and hours too, but the main thing that I would love for women to take away from this, whether you're birthing a physical baby or a baby in your life, is to really just honor your feminine process. Like, honor your inner wisdom, honor your process, and just approve of yourself the whole way.
I love that. Thank you so much. Okay, so where can they find you?
So my website is ecstatic-birth.com, and that's where I blog and share resources, and you can access my various trainings. And I also have a YouTube channel where I'm starting to put videos up for people that are looking for more of that kind of experience.
Awesome. Well, I'm going to have that in all the show notes. And this has been such an incredible conversation. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with us and for meeting a sister goddess. I just love, I love meeting new sister goddesses all the time. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Margaret. Thank you so much for hosting me. Thank you for helping me get the word out. Thank you for doing the work that you're doing in the world. It's so, so important. I'm so grateful for you.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. Well, have a beautiful day. We'll talk soon.
You too. You too.
Well, thank you so much for joining me this week. And for all of my listeners, Sheila has offered a beautiful free gift. It's called The Expectant Mother's Guide to Ecstatic Birth, Less Pain, More Pleasure in Childbirth. And it's a 10-day email course, which includes talking about pleasure as a birth tool, facing your fears, developing your inner wisdom, navigating your big decisions. So I will leave the link in the show notes. And also, to find out more about Sheila, you will also find everything in the show notes. Head on over to margaretromero.com/episode 74. Thank you all so much for listening this week. And if you've been loving these conversations, I would love for you to leave a review in iTunes. So head on over there, leave a review. I would love, love, love to hear from you. And if you haven't been catching me on Instagram, I am there. I try to be there at least once a day. I love Insta stories. I love Instagram. So just trying to really be a little bit more present there. And you'll also find the podcast clips on there as well. Those are pretty new to the Instagram feed. So thank you so much all for listening. Have a most beautiful week. Bye for now.